item is we're as everybody knows, we're flipping the order. We have a pretty straightforward administrative item here. So we're going to take that up first. So Amanda, good morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing fine. Please, why don't you please share
Absolutely.
with us what we're working through?
So the item number 3, which we're doing first, is Executive Regulation 10-20, which is a fairly straightforward regulation that implements Bill 1819, which, as you recall, you walked through that bill, and the council enacted it earlier this year. And Bill 1819 required a landlord to pay a tenant relocation expenses if the tenant's housing was condemned as unfit for human habitation under certain circumstances. There is a amendment that came up after the packet went to, after the staff report went to print, that is fairly straightforward. For the determinative violations sections, there's a line that DHCA has recommended to be removed, and that is the phrase, and determines that the violation cannot be cured within 30 days from the date of inspection. And the reason that needs to come out is because the regulation applies to all condemnations, not just those that could that are subject to the 30-day time period. So staff would recommend approval with that amendment.
Okay. DHCA, would you like to share any thoughts you have on this?
Well, since it has to, if it's condemned, then whatever the issue is urgent. Because for a property to be condemned, that means it's not suitable for human habitation. So we shouldn't be relying on the 30-day measure. But, you know, code is going to inspect, and code will determine if it's something that can be fixed quickly, then the landlord should fix it quickly. But the landlord's need to house that person shouldn't be affected by how long it takes to fix.
Director Nagano?
Oh, yes. I didn't realize that I was on mute. Yeah, good morning. We don't have a whole lot to add here except for this amendment. The bill itself was pretty clear, and we made things clearer in terms of, you know, how we're going to calculate temporary displacement compliance and first right to occupy, what the process we're going to follow. So besides this amendment and, you know, the making things clear, we don't have a whole lot to add here. The bill itself was pretty clear. So unless the committee has any questions, you know, we'll be all set to go on this one.
All right. Councilmember Jawando is in the waiting room of the Zoom. So maybe council staff could let him in. I think he was the sponsor of the legislation. Mm-hmm. So we'll let him join us and make a comment. Andrew, yeah.
Yeah, just a quick question on the amendment of the Method 2 regulation. Is there any posting requirement, considering it wasn't in the staff packet, wasn't in the register? I mean, what's the legal protocol here?
Sure, it's within the scope of the advertisement of the regulation, so it doesn't need to go back out for public comment. What will happen is the executive will need to submit an amended regulation, and when the amended regulation comes over, which hopefully wouldn't take too long because it is a minor change, then the amended regulation will go to council, and the staff report for council will detail the change.
So we would be approving this as a committee contingent on the amended regulation, and then that would go to full council. Is that what we're being asked?
That's correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Jawando, this is the regulation implementing legislation that I believe you introduced.
It is, yes. Thank you. And good morning to everybody. I think it's pretty straightforward. I don't know if you've had the explanation. It looks like it does what the bill says it should do. So I'm excited to see it move forward and appreciate it. It sounds like I caught the Councilmember Friedson's question of we'll just have that technical, that'll come before full council and we can deal with that then. So yeah, no, I'm fine with it. I'm happy about it. I would like, if there's any comment from DHCA about, I'm curious to hear if you've had any are there any cases that are in flux or where this has happened and you couldn't use it or you had to use it? Or I'm just curious about that aspect of it.
We've had a couple of people call and request it, but they were room rentals, so it didn't apply.
Way to rub that in. I wanted it to apply to room rentals, but we didn't get, we didn't. We'll have to come back. Okay. Well, if you could, I'd actually be interested in seeing that because we can always get more information and those cases, Rosie. I mean, I think those are. But you're saying they were room rentals and it was inhabitable, but the law didn't apply.
Yeah, because it was like they were renting a basement and the ceiling was too low or something was going on down there. They didn't have a way out. It was not safe. And so they had to condemn it, but we couldn't, and a lot of times what staff will do is say, well, you're going to have to give her back her money. And so we pushed it. But, if the landlords really had fought back, we
Right.
couldn't enforce it, but we would push it. We did what we could do.
All right. Thank you. Well, thank you for raising that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can you tell us what happened in those cases, Rosie?
Generally, because the landlord's already in trouble with code enforcement, they'll do what we ask them.
Okay.
So we say, you have to give her security deposit back and her pro rata rent and give her an extra amount of money so that they can move, because they had to move right away, or pay for the hotel for X days. And they'll do it as long as if we ask for 2 months rent and all that, they wouldn't do it. But if we push for some, they'll give us what we asked for because they're already in trouble.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, just so you were able to get something, but not what the requirements under the law.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah. All right. Well, I appreciate
So we
your
do
work.
push for that. We do push.
I know you do. Yeah. Thank you. All right.
All right. We have I guess we need to move we don't move the fix, right? We don't amend these.
Yes, so your recommendation would be to approve with an amendment, and then the way that, so that should be your recommendation so that DHCA and the executive can submit an amended regulation.
Okay. Move as amended. I think we're all, without objection, right? Okay. Very good. Rio. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on now to the general plan. Thrive Montgomery 2050. It's a very expansive vision here. We're trying to really provide some clarity about what the next several decades of planning work in the county, how it will tie together. And, we're starting this based on an understanding that the existing general plan isn't really specific enough anymore for the environment that we're in, that we know we're going to be in, increasingly in the future as to where density will be located and how we're going to grow, how we will be able to meet the housing challenges of the community. So there's many elements of this plan. It's been underway now Gwen will tell us, Casey will tell us, it's been a while at planning, and we are bringing it to PHED. We've got I don't think we have a timeline for this that is unrealistic or too fast. This is a very high level policy document, and it includes lots and lots of recommendations. All of those recommendations would have to be subsequently devised as individual initiatives. So I know that there has been a call from some quarters to not take any action, to stall on this. we'll have this discussion today. I'm not really seeing why we would want to not continue forward with our visioning process for the future. Lots of great content in the plan. I really enjoyed reading through it. And I'm sure, I've got some comments myself. There'll be plenty of opportunities for improvement. So, Pam, you want to tell us how you had framed it, or should we just go right to Chair Anderson? Or
yeah, I didn't want to take up much of the time. I know that this is the third time that the planning department's come before the committee to brief you on Thrive 2050. This is now their public hearing document that you're going to be discussing, and it's expansive. There's a lot to cover in a general plan. So rather than talking about all of it and getting a rebriefing on some of the stuff that I think the committee's had a great briefing on the information related to outreach and the components of the plan and how they've progressed and all that, is to focus on some of the high level but items that may be the most talked about when the plan comes forward. And those are listed in the staff report. But that's what they plan to focus on today in their conversation with the committee. So I don't want to take time because you get to then have a nice conversation and ask questions.
all right.
Great. So if Khalid could pull up the PowerPoint presentation, we can get started. For the record, Gwen Wright, Planning Director. With us here today are the Planning Board Chair, Casey Anderson, Khalid Afzal, and Carrie McCarthy, who are co-leads of the plan, and Tanya Stern, who is our Deputy Planning Director and has been working on this project and giving us lots of good advice based upon her experience in the District of Columbia working on their comp plan. So I'm going to say a few comments at the beginning, then I'm going to turn it over to Casey, and then we're going to dive, who's going to make some remarks, and then we're going to dive into some of the specifics. If we could go to the next slide, please. So what I wanted to cover briefly, again, is what is a general plan? I know that we've talked to you about this, but we keep getting folks really a little uncertain about this. They keep in public meetings that we've attended, we're continuing to have folks say, well, why aren't you coming up with the specific guidelines or the specific zoning text amendment, and what does this really mean? Then Casey's going to talk a little bit about the framework and the rationale of the plan. I'm going to go back then about some specific ideas in Thrive Montgomery, and then we'll talk to you about the next steps in the process. Next slide, please. One of the things that we did to sort of go back to think about what is a general plan to help, again, explain it, was we actually went back to the general plan from the 1960s and looked at the language in that document that served us so well. And a couple of things that were in that I think are really very telling. It talks about the general plan as a dynamic instrument rather than a finished product. Its goals and its major patterns are firm, but its details must evolve and develop to meet the emerging needs of the people who will be served by the plan. It is neither possible nor desirable to spell out each zoning line, every street and highway, or every public park and building site that will be needed between now and the turn of the next century. Again, that was where they were looking in the 1960s. People's needs are not that rigidly predictable. However, it does, in the second quote, talk about the importance of establishing these overall policies for development in the regional district. There are detailed master plans. There were in the 60s and there are now that have some specific direction that is in accord with the major policies of our general plan as it is today. But a new general plan with a strong guidance will help as we move forward on detailed plans to be produced in the future. I've talked in the past about how, the general plan in 1964 did not say there shall be an ag reserve. It talked about the importance of agriculture and rural open space, but it wasn't until 1980, 16 years later, that the ag reserve was created through the functional plan for preservation of agriculture and rural open space. On a less positive side, in the 1993 update and refinement to the general plan goals and policies, the whole sort of idea of the East County as an important corridor was essentially written out of the general plan. And Casey's going to talk about this a little bit more. And that was really the rationale for essentially not touching the East County and sort of the disinvestment that resulted from that idea in the general plan refinement of 1993. So general plan policies do have a big impact on what comes forward later. It can have a big positive impact. It can have a negative impact. And so when people sort of say, well, why does this general plan not include zoning recommendations? The idea is that the plan is going to give the framework that will decide future zoning recommendations for better or for worse. And as we've seen with the Ag Reserve on one hand and East County on the other hand, it is the document that you hold up and say when you're making a zoning decision or you're creating a new master plan, this is why we're doing this. This is the framework. This is the rationale. It's a very important aspect of how we create the county of the future. So although the recommendations, the goals, policies are high level in the document that we're talking about, the impact is enormous. And the impact for the next several decades is enormous. So don't minimize the importance of this document simply because it doesn't include a zoning recommendation or a zoning text amendment or a new piece of legislation. This is the framework that's going to lead to all of those things in the future. Next slide, please. So I think Casey is going to take it from here and again talk a little bit about that rationale, that framework.
Thanks, Gwen. So what you see on the left was the original concept for the general plan, and that was adopted in 1964. And what you see in the lower right is that the I-95 corridor was included as a focus for a place where growth should be focused, in addition to the 270 corridor, and you can see what's now IC66 out there to the left. In the middle is the 1993 refinement, and you see at that point, as Gwen had mentioned, the Route 29 I-95 corridor was read out of the plan. Part of that was because I-95, of course, is in Prince George's County, but it was also because the civic and political leadership of the county at that time made a judgment that their constituents weren't really interested in seeing 29 become a growth corridor in the same way that, say, 355 and Rockville Pike serve the west side of the county and parallel I-270. And I think it's clear that was a mistake, that writing the I-95 and 29 corridor out of the general plan resulted in a generation of disinvestment for which we're all of us who care about the East County are still paying the price today. What you see on the right is a heat map that shows generally where development is, where the intensively developed parts of the county are today. And I think I'd point out two things about that map on the right. It shows, number one, that the pattern that was recommended by the general plan in 1964 and later in the 1993 refinement was in general followed. You can see the 270 corridor and the urban ring inside, south of Randolph Road, and particularly south of the Beltway, is in fact the most intensely developed area, and it's surrounded by those suburban wedges of residential areas, and then the outlying area has been preserved for agriculture. However, you'll notice that despite what the previous plan said, reality overtook the planning documents. For one thing, Georgia Avenue, the eastern leg of the Red Line, which was not contemplated as part of the original 1964 plan, became a growth corridor. And so even though the plans are important in guiding where growth occurs, they can't resist the economic forces and the political forces that reality imposes on planning. And you'll also see that the sort of southeastern part of the county, the lower part of the 29 corridor, has already experienced some amount of growth despite the efforts to basically stifle Route 29 and that I-95 corridor as a focus for more development. So I think that highlights the extent to which the plan needs to be updated to reflect the reality as it actually exists on the ground, as well as pointing the way forward for where we want growth to occur in the future. Next slide. Again, the focus was on I-270, particularly after 1993. And what you see is on the right, another iteration of a heat map that shows the intensity of commercial uses, in particular based on zoning. And you can see how that reflects the relative lack of private investment as well as public investment in the East County. Next slide. A major focus of this plan is racial equity. And the intersections with planning are multi-layered. But I just want to point out that the geography of race and income in the county are largely overlapping. And the consequence of making decisions about where public and private investment are going to be encouraged or facilitated have implications for socioeconomic equity, for racial justice. And I think that that's apparent, not just in the way that policies of the more distant past, like redlining and restrictive covenants, but even the more recent past, like the decisions about what would happen to the East County, have had an impact in more recent decades. Next slide. The school system is another area that we don't have direct control over, and in some cases the council doesn't have complete power over the school system either, except through the budget process. But the geography of the county and the way that land use and transportation decisions are made also influences neighborhood level socioeconomic and racial integration, and it has consequences for the public schools. And there's a feedback loop between the schools and what's going on with public and private investment at the neighborhood level, because to the extent that neighborhoods that are perceived as being more desirable get more investment, they also tend to attract more attention, not only from transportation investments and other things county government controls, but also the schools. And you can see the degree to which poverty or lower incomes tend to be concentrated. The farms rate is much higher in many of the East County schools, as well as some of the schools up the railroad line up towards Gaithersburg. And schools in the southwest part of the county have very low concentrations of farm students, and also tend to be characterized by fewer African American and Hispanic students. So the disparities that play out at the level of real estate development or investment in things like transportation networks also work their way through the school system, and that has very important and troubling implications for the life prospects of the kids who are raised in the neighborhoods that have not received as much investment. Next slide. Our current development pattern needs to evolve, not just because we need to find places for the next 200,000 people who come here to live over the next 30 years, but also because growth and development are the currency that we can use to improve the quality and attractiveness of our neighborhoods, make them more equitable, make them more socioeconomically and racially integrated, and the distribution of resources be more fair, and also make them more environmentally sustainable. Next slide. As I said, we need to accommodate 200,000 people, and you've seen some version of the slide several times in the past, but I just wanted to point out that if the only task were to fit 200,000 more people in, we could probably find a way to jam them in those last remaining empty spots on this Swiss cheese map. But as you can see, that would involve spreading them all over the county in whatever pockets are still available theoretically for redevelopment development under the current planning framework. The problem with that would be not only would you get sprawl, but you would also reinforce many of the autocentric and also inequitable segregated development patterns that we've experienced in the past and up to and including the present day. And also we would miss the opportunity to make that development more environmentally sustainable. Next slide. The other dimension in which we really need to rethink our development patterns is that such a high proportion of our land is zoned for single-family detached housing, despite the fact that a larger and larger proportion of households consist of a single person. This reflects the fact that the 1964 plan was written in a very different time. The social and economic forces that have led to smaller households were, of course, not reflected or anticipated by the 1964 plan. And so the 1964 plan's reverence for protecting single-family neighborhoods has come into conflict in a pretty serious way with adapting our housing stock to meet the needs of the present and the future. Next slide. So redevelopment is very difficult. It's always contentious because it involves putting something different in a place where something else already is, and not simply building something on a greenfield. But, next slide. It's an opportunity, and it's the currency that we can use to improve infrastructure and quality of life. We live in an era of constrained public resources, for better or for worse. And that means that the resources to improve environmental sustainability by doing things like making stormwater management more thoroughly integrated into development sites, creating more walkable neighborhoods with sidewalks and more attractive streetscapes and better design of the public realm, making our neighborhoods more vibrant and therefore economically competitive by making them more attractive, as well as introducing different housing types into existing neighborhoods. All those things can only happen with private investment because the public sector simply doesn't have the money. In an earlier era, in some ways, it was there were very misguided concepts that the federal government used to encourage urban renewal. But the benefit of living in that earlier era was at least the federal government was interested in directing resources to the neighborhood level and the state and local governments to try to help them improve the quality of their communities. We don't want to turn back to urban renewal, but it's unfortunate that we don't have community development block grants and other resources that were available to an earlier generation to try to make public investments to make things better in our community. So the consequence of that is we have to turn to private development, especially redevelopment and infill, if we hope to make changes that will improve our quality of life and achieve these bigger objectives about racial equity, economic competitiveness, and environmental sustainability. Next slide. So just by way of example, what am I talking about? If you look on the left, you see a scene that's could be many places in Montgomery County, and in fact, suburbs all over America. It's a very unattractive public realm, not very conducive or appealing, much less safe for walking. And what you see on the right is what can happen when we have redevelopment, which not only produces more housing, office space, retail space, bars and restaurants, things that people are willing to pay for because they want to occupy those buildings and use them for their own purposes, but also facilitates some of that private investment being directed to improving the quality of the public realm and making our streets safer, and making our streetscapes more appealing and attractive for everyone. Next slide. Here's an example of for stormwater management. Private investment, again, can help us get the resources that we need to make stormwater retrofits that reduce flooding and avoid property damage, which is being caused by more violent weather events, combined with the fact that an earlier generation of development did not include really any environmental regulation designed to avoid runoff. Next slide. And this shows the results at Pike and Rose. I think you've probably seen this slide many times by now, but I think it really illustrates it about as vividly as any other illustration I could give you. What you saw, Pike and Rose 15 years ago, was a strip center with Bye Bye Baby and Silver Diner in the parking lot, a giant slab of asphalt. And you see how many tens of thousands of cubic feet of water are kept on the site and infiltrated without running off into the streams and to the gutters and polluting the Chesapeake Bay, causing property damage in the abutting neighborhoods, and causing environmental problems today. And that's just from 1 2-year storm. The amount of water that is kept on that site is probably in the millions of cubic feet over the course of a year's rainfall. Next slide. So we have these bigger picture objectives. What are we trying to do? We're trying to be more economically competitive, racially equitable, and environmentally sustainable. And that implies operating in a new way in a different context. Our county's become more urban, more diverse and interconnected already, and we want to lean into those trends and embrace them, to take advantage of them. And the principles of what this means for land use are actually not really new. They're back to the basics. The ideas of high quality urbanism, not urban as in the city, but urbanism meaning a set of ideas, which consist at their most fundamental level of a compact form of development at the scale of both the county and individual neighborhoods or development projects, a mix and diversity of uses, housing types, building types, et cetera, and a mobility approach that emphasizes not just availability of transit, but walkability and biking to encourage active and healthy lifestyles, to encourage social engagement, and also to focus in every respect on good design to make sure that the product is executed in a way that not only achieves its basic goals, but is attractive and the sort of place that we all would want to live or want our children or grandchildren to live. Next slide.
Hey, Casey, just a comment here. I feel like I'm glad you're getting into the corridors. We're on board with doing the plan. I think we want to talk about what the plan is and so forth. So
Yes, and I think
Yeah.
I will turn it over to Gwen right now, but I appreciate that. I know that some of this seems like ground we've been over, but as Gwen said, I think we continue to get questions about, well, what is the point of this exactly? And I hope that framing this in terms not just of we need to find a place to 200,000 people, but that this is the opportunity to direct growth in a way that will fund and execute all of these ideas and approaches that will address our broader issues with economic competitiveness, with racial equity, and with environmental sustainability. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Absolutely.
So, yeah, we'd now like to talk about some of the specifics in the document and some of the things that we think will require a lot of discussion as we move forward. And the thing I want to mention is that we have been moving in this direction. We have been, what's that expression, running and chewing gum at the same time. So some of the things that you see here are not a surprise. We have been focusing on corridors. I think that the Veers Mill Corridor Plan is an example of that, but we think the future is doing more corridor planning in an even more focused way than we did with Veers Mill. Veers Mill was very focused on the Vision Zero issues, but we think there's an opportunity to be even more focused. We have a corridor plan in our work program for Fairland Briggs Cheney, and we think that will be sort of one of the first big efforts that implements this idea. I think that we've seen the new BRT on Route 29 open flash, and we're going to see, we hope, additional BRT options implemented in the next few years. That current transit that we have and that planned transit is where we need to focus our growth. We need to think about housing types along those corridors that are going to change the character of the corridor, as well as providing density to make the corridors sustainable mixed-use places. The image that you see is actually an artist's rendering of Georgia Avenue, looking down towards the Forest Glen Metro Station with our existing, I think it's General Getty Park, but how we could actually intensify development right along Georgia Avenue, headed towards the Forest Glen Metro, where we would have higher rise buildings, but where it becomes a real boulevard and a mix of uses that provides that access that people need to, which we're going to talk about later, to the 15-minute living, the places not only to live, but to work, to go to school, to have neighborhood serving retail uses, to have parks and recreational opportunities. One of the items, and I put this specifically because I know we've had a very challenging conversation just recently about the idea of pilots to try to target development near high capacity transit, to change what you see on the left into what you see on the right is going to take more than just zoning. It is going to take financial incentives. It is going to take different kinds of public investment. That's why I'm sort of saying this general plan is not just about, well, how should we do a corridor plan and add zoning density in certain corridors. It's really about where do we redo our parks? Where do we add other public facilities along those corridors? Where do we allow some commercial and retail along these corridors, which we traditionally have not had? Where do we put our investments in all kinds of infrastructure? Certainly transit, but also bikeways and sidewalks. So the idea of corridor development is not just about the private development. It's about prioritizing where we, as a county, where we put our, money where our mouth is. That's where we're going to need to focus our efforts. Next slide.
Before you go on, Glenn, and we will come back to all the various issues. I think, I'm gathering that a major point of the plan is to highlight corridors as the future growth strategy.
Yes.
I don't know that really comes through as much as it should. I think they're there. I think everything is there, but I think the significance of what that actually might mean is still maybe. There are many other things we'll talk about, and there's different. But as I'm absorbing it, having reread it and so forth, I think that's an area where it seems to me it's one of the significant differences of this plan. I mean, we had a wedges and corridors policy, but what you're talking about here is far more granular.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we talked previously about the fact that we've moved from the idea of the one big corridor to the web. I remember Councilmember Jawanto talking about the idea that this should be called a web and centers plan. And it's true. We have a web of corridors, and every one of those corridors needs to have a master plan done and needs to have specific goals for its redevelopment so that we can turn the Georgia Avenue section in the previous slide from what was on the left to the right.
Exactly. Okay. Well, so that's a big one. There are many, I have plenty more notes I want to talk about, but while you were on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I definitely, we know that the working draft, the public hearing draft is going to evolve and get better and become more pointed as we move forward in the process. And that's why, we're here to talk to you. We've talked with the planning board. We are having a big public hearing on November 19th where we want to hear from the community. We want to make sure that the points are being very clearly articulated.
Sure. Please continue.
So the next big idea is really planning for people instead of cars. And, what you see on the left is Rockville Pike. What you see on the right is 14th Street in the district. And what's the difference? The difference is that cars, no matter what we've done on the redevelopment of the land along Rockville Pike, cars are still king on Rockville Pike. And, on 14th Street, you see what was a 6-lane road. And they've taken 2 lanes and dedicated those lanes for bicycles, for transit, for parking, for pedestrians, for trees. They have frequent and very clearly marked crosswalks. So the blocks are broken up into much smaller pieces, and people are less likely to jaywalk because they have clear places frequently where they can cross. So it's not only what's going on the private side with the kind of development that they have, it's really how the public realm is treated. And so, a big idea that we've talked a bit with Montgomery County DOT about, and I think it freaked them out a little bit, was this idea of, we as a county policy would limit the number of through lanes in downtowns and town centers to a maximum of 4 general purpose lanes. And if it's more than 4 right now, we would repurpose the extra space for transit, wider sidewalks, bikeways, trees, and stormwater management. And that is a huge change. We have tried to implement road diets in a few places, including in Germantown, where we've had pedestrian fatalities, and we're trying to slow things down. But it is a change in mindset. It's really connected with some of the thinking in our growth policy discussions that we've been having separately, that the idea in particularly our downtowns and town centers, but even in our orange and yellow areas, is not that everything is about how quickly can cars get through an intersection. What we need to be thinking about is the network that allows us to have vehicular travel, but that also prioritizes the safety and the comfort of other modes, including transit and pedestrians and bicycles. I mean, one of the things that we realize is this is also an equity issue. We see that the majority of people who own cars in Montgomery County are, frankly, not Black and brown people. In fact, from the OLO report, Blacks were more than twice as likely, 232.7%, as whites to not have a vehicle. And that's from the work that the OLO Racial Equity Office did. So we need to create environments that are safe and equitable. At the same time, it's also an environmental strategy by getting people to take transit, to walk, to bike, to not focus on cars. We're also lowering vehicle miles traveled. And vehicle miles traveled are one of our biggest contributions to greenhouse gas emissions. And so we are really looking at this planning for people instead of cars. It's important to us from an equity standpoint, from a environmental standpoint, and it's going to create the great places that people want to spend time at. I mean, I don't know how many of you have been to a restaurant along, well, if you've been to any restaurants recently, but 6 months ago, a restaurant along Rockville Pike versus sitting at a restaurant along 14th Street in the District of Columbia. It's a completely different experience. It's a much more dynamic economic area along 14th Street. So we think this idea of planning for people instead of cars is very important from all of our goal outcomes, but it's really going to be one of the most challenging to change the mindset.
That's for sure. I mean, you have to have alternatives, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's the core of 14th Street is DC is saying you've got alternatives. So we're not going to prioritize your long drive anymore. You've got other ways to get around. So we've got to provide other ways to get around. You got to do a better job. And I think it's part of that. I mean, the reason why you shrink the lanes is so that you can provide higher quality transit. But they have to go together, obviously. Interesting. Good. All right.
Okay, next slide. Of course, it sounds like some of these big ideas are not such big ideas because we've been talking about them and talking about them and talking about them. But the reality is that we have talked about them, but except in a few instances, we have not written down that this is the county's policy.
That's a big difference.
Happily, with housing, you did adopt the COG targets, and that was a great move. But we need to not just sort of adopt targets. We need to actually produce more housing and different kinds of housing. I think Casey had made the point that a lot of our trends are showing that our household sizes are smaller. Now, that's partly due to the fact that we have an older population, but it's also due to the fact that people are getting married later, establishing households later, perhaps choosing not to get married at all. And we have a much, much greater percentage of single households now than we ever have had in the history of the county. We also know that this is a huge equity issue. Over 54% of our African American residents are rent burdened in the county, and only about 42% of our African American residents actually own a home. And that is in comparison to 73% of white residents. So we are certainly looking at opportunities to create more rental housing, but we also have to look at opportunities to create small units that can be purchased, including duplexes, triplexes, quadruplexes. I had a wonderful conversation just last week with folks from Habitat for Humanity who have some really creative ideas about creating for sale duplex units in a very cost-effective way that would be extremely affordable. And it's exciting that we have many groups in the county thinking about this idea even as we speak, how to actually implement it. We think it makes most sense to have these additional kinds of housing options near high capacity transit, both our existing heavy rail, light rail, but also our BRT lines. We're looking at ways that that can be done on each corridor in the context of that corridor. So for example, on Route 29, which is a much bigger road, you might not just want some duplexes and triplexes, you might want more mid-rise apartments or 2-over-2s. In a place like Georgia Avenue near Forest Glen, it may be more appropriate for the triplexes, quadruplexes, small apartment buildings because of the scale of the road, the scale of the adjoining neighborhoods. We truly believe that each corridor needs to have its own master plan so that we can understand how we can add this housing, how we can add this density in the best context and the way that's going to create a great place, not just plop down additional density. So we had a great discussion during the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills plan about some of these ideas. We think that, again, the upcoming Fairland Briggs Cheney plan is going to be another great opportunity to talk about more housing and different kinds of housing. That also involves different kinds of housing construction techniques. And we have been exploring different innovative housing construction that includes heavy timber frame. It includes modular. There are a lot of ideas out there to do other housing construction types that may make it much more cost effective to add new housing in the targeted areas we're talking about. Next. So this is one that sounds very plain vanilla and, sure, makes a lot of sense, complete communities, services, and amenities close to home. But I think that the reality is that some of the biggest battles that we have had have been when a corner store, even one that existed historically, like the Bethesda Community Store, wanted to expand, wanted to keep operating as a store. There has been in this county the idea that you must separate your uses, that you can't have anything commercial near anything residential. And we've got to get over that. If you look at the again, this is where my historic preservation background comes in. If you look even in Chevy Chase along Brookville Road, there is a small group of commercial businesses, the Brookville Market, the drugstore, a restaurant, and they existed before the neighborhood really came into its full fruition. If you tried to put that little strip of neighborhood serving uses in an existing neighborhood today, it would be very controversial, very unpopular. But along our corridors, again, thinking about the one we just talked about on Georgia Avenue, it is not necessarily true that every use along that corridor needs to be residential or a park. There can be small office buildings. There can be small neighborhood serving retail uses. That's what actually gets you your 15-minute living, not just for the development along the corridors, but for the people in the residential neighborhoods adjoining the corridors so that they don't have to walk all the way, a mile and a half to a commercial use to pick up a quart of milk. They can walk a short distance to the corridor and get what they need. Or if they're on the BRT coming home, they can stop on their way home and grab a quart of milk and get to their home. I think one of the issues with the pandemic and the isolation that we've had, I know the director of Environment, Tommy Wells, in the District of Columbia, at the beginning of this said he was so glad he lived in a neighborhood that had a corner store, because when we were all in such terrible isolation, he could still walk to that corner store and pick up a can of soup or a quart of milk. And we have moved so far away from that mix of uses that, again, the idea of even opening or expanding the Bethesda Community Store became a huge controversy back in the day. We have to think about changing that. We have to have a general plan that says it is not only okay, it is important to have this kind of mix of uses in all of our neighborhoods. We're not talking about plopping down a store smack in the middle of a single-family neighborhood, but if we have corridors, we can put this mix of uses along the corridors, and it can be accessible to the people on the corridors and in the neighborhood as well. It's really, it's a little bit of back to the future, back to thinking about how corner stores were so important in many neighborhoods, as we all, at least I had one in my neighborhood as I was growing up. I don't know about the rest of you.
Got one in mine, on Sligo Avenue.
I mean,
walk there. It's part of our routines.
It's really important, but we are developing great swaths of the county with none of that available, and right. It's a problem. So next slide. That goes not only for retail, it goes, and this is an even bigger, somewhat controversial idea. We need our parks and gathering spaces and our needed public facilities closer to home. I know that the move has been for budgetary reasons to consolidate a lot of our functions, whether they be HHS or rec or schools. Everything's about consolidation. That kind of consolidation is counter to this idea that we're going to stop planning for cars, that we're going to focus on creating great places. We have to, and it's an equity issue, because we aren't seeing the communities where people don't have cars, are dependent on transit, necessarily having all the same public investments. And so if you don't live in a neighborhood that has a great park and you don't have a car, you can't get to it. We want to see parks and needed facilities that have public services in many places. What you see on the left is in the District of Columbia. It is a library that's in a new residential building that's been built just recently. We have another example also in the District of Columbia where they put a fire station and a private gym and affordable housing all together is one building that's in the district. And the co-location study that we did a couple of years ago really talked about this. Again, I do want to say we've been running and chewing gum at the same time. We've been building some of these ideas over the course of the last 5-6 years. But this general plan is the sort of weaving together of those ideas. Co-location and having dispersed public services is the future, we believe, and the most equitable way that we can distribute those public services. Next.
Time check, Gwen. How far through your presentation are you?
We have only like 2 or 3 more slides. We're almost done. Diversity is our strength. We are very proud of the outreach that we did for this plan. We feel like we touched people who had never been involved in the planning process before. We just recently made a presentation to the Montgomery County Civic Federation. We showed them literally the thousands of people who have been touched either through our surveys, through our advertising on bus shelters, through our e-newsletter. We, for our public hearing, are sending out 91,000 postcards to tell people about the upcoming public hearing on November 19th. We think we've done a lot in the right direction, but there's more to do. That we have to think about how to build that civic capacity to make government planning and decision-making processes accessible. And that's related to technology, and that is a sort of subcategory of this. We believe that equitable distribution of technology, which isn't in red here, but it is in the plan, is an incredibly important way to have a connected county. Next.
I liked that piece. That was interesting.
So regional solutions and strategies, we think that we, again, the COG housing effort was a good example, but we have many more ways that we could work regionally. For example, in Northern Virginia, they have actually a Northern Virginia transportation group. Why couldn't we get a coalition of Prince George's, Montgomery, Frederick, Howard County, and talk about transportation technological change? It could talk about autonomous vehicles. It could talk about our BRT systems. It could talk about a variety of things. But we certainly participate in the Transportation Policy Board at COG, but in Northern Virginia, they have their own group who's talking about transportation just in Northern Virginia. We could be doing the same kind of thing, thinking about our immediate region. We can think about that in terms of our transportation, housing, but even equity. We need to not think of ourselves as an island. We need to think of ourselves as, how we work with our colleagues all around us. Next. So implementation, I do want to emphasize what I said earlier, which is it's a guidebook, not a roadmap. We have identified a whole bunch of actions. we're thinking about whether those actions should be in the document or in a separate sort of related appendix, because once you put something in a general plan to change it, you have to go through a master plan amendment. So we were thinking the actions maybe would be better in a separate document, not formally part of the plan, but we're still thinking about that and are open to thoughts. We have separated the actions into short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And that document was sent to you ahead of time. It will keep us plenty busy over the next 20 to 30 years. Next. So I'm going to let Casey conclude with just a few brief comments. We know we've gotten a lot of expressions of concern about COVID-19 and requests to delay the plan, and we've thought about that a lot. I'm going to let Casey take over.
I think that the main point I want to make here is that we have got a lot of very serious challenges in the county. Economically, we're very pressed as a result of the economic impact, not just of COVID, but we really never fully got back on solid ground after the 2008-2009 recession, as was true of many other parts of the country as well. And we really can't afford to wait to begin this years-long process of figuring out what our competitive advantages are in the future. Similarly, I think that the protests against the against police violence and the George Floyd protests really highlighted the fact that we cannot put off the task of figuring out what our role is at the local level in addressing racial and social justice and the equities that have been created both by past land use practices and also other things that are going on in society. And obviously climate change is a pressing problem. I was at the ribbon cutting for Bus Rapid Transit line on Route 29 the other day, and the county executive got up and said, you know, I think Route 29 should have been a growth corridor. There should have been more development here, and this bus rapid transit system will help facilitate that. And then he said, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, but we really can't wait to press forward on projects like the Route 29 BRT because we really need to get going to not just plan, but act for our future. And so I spoke after him. I said, I could not agree with you more. Route 29 should have been a growth corridor. It was written out of our general plan, and that's why we want to put it back in the general plan that we're drafting right now for the council's consideration. And I also agree wholeheartedly with the county executive that the future is not going to wait for the end of the pandemic. We need to get going right now. So I wanted to close by saying I think the county executive was absolutely right the other day at the ribbon cutting. We need to plan for the future. We need to figure out where we can accommodate growth in a way that makes sense and will facilitate our other goals. And the time to do that is starting right now.
All right.
And then the last slide just shows the schedule, and you'll see we have our public hearing November 19th, and you'll be having a transmittal of this document in March of 2021.
March of 2021. Oh,
yes.
Why don't you leave that? All right. So we are here, October, public hearing draft plan, public hearing November 19th, more planning board work sessions from December through March, and then it comes over to the council and we want to approve it. I mean, it'll be under this schedule, it'll be landing pretty much as budget is peaking, but we might have some time. I think we would actually, beginning of April could be a good time if it got to us then, to at least take it up substantially. Okay.
You'd have 30 days notice for a public hearing, so you might not have a public hearing till May, right. And then work sessions in June and July.
Okay, so it's a summer, it's council summer. It's not, when it
Yes.
says April 2021, that you're not suggesting council approval in April.
No, that's when you would start your review.
Okay, let's talk about timeline. Councilmember Joando.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation, Director Wright and Chair Anderson. You know, I remember it's when we were having this conversation, seems like a light years ago, about when should we deliver the general plan and how should we kick into gear to do it? And I remember you, Ms. Wright, saying, you know, this is going to be a big endeavor. If we want us to do it, we need to get a signal and move forward. And I was very supportive then about, I think we should move forward quickly and try to get the planning started and the discussion of the key points, because this is going to be a very important framework. And I still feel the same way, that it is a very important framework and that we should move forward. I did want to probe a little bit on that last slide, that you don't have to put it back up, but the kind of closing slide. I do think this is unlike, well, it's not, I think, I think a lot of things, but this is a fact. This is unlike anything we have ever experienced unless you're over 100 years old, like General McGee, who we had here and honored recently, and he doesn't remember it probably. No one has gone through what's going on right now. And the changes to our economy, the changes to the way people work, if they're fortunate enough to still have their jobs, and the changes impact on our transportation, modes of transportation, and how people go, and teleworking, and everything, and layoffs, and everything, and where businesses locate and how they locate, and what kind of structures they need, and what their business models are regarding that. There's a lot in flux. In that, and I just use the example of my wife works at a tech company, and, they stopped going to work in March, and they're not going back until at least middle of next year. And some may never go back. I know you've seen announcements from others. And I just think, I think there are components of this plan that could and are compatible to what the new reality may or may not be. I do think, though, I'd want to hear a little more about, because of this uncertainty, I want to make sure we build in enough flexibility to address what we might get in 2, 3, 4 years out of this changed reality, which I think will be significantly different. There will be some normalization. So I just wanted to, how are you thinking about that? And I liked one of the things that stuck out to me that you said, Ms. Wright, was leaving some of the actions in another document, so that that seems like that could be something that could create more flexibility potentially. But could you all just talk about how you're thinking about this a little more and addressing that point?
Sure, I can lead off, and I know Casey may want to join in. We have been thinking as a planning department a lot about the future. We've actually even had a group of some of our younger staff have put together a sort of a pandemic impact study group, and have been thinking about what may change. And I agree with you, Councilmember Joando. I think that this is going to be a monumental change. Yet I do believe in my heart that people need people, and that ultimately the whole idea of city planning is to think about how to create structures for people to live side by side, work, recreate, shop, do whatever their needs are, and to have places to gather. So I believe that the basic ideas of connectedness, which is one of the ideas in this document, and of complete communities, is going to be true even with the changes that we may see due to COVID. I also believe that, as Chair Anderson said, there are some significant problems that existed before COVID ever came about, having to do with housing affordability and attainability, having to do with equity, having to do with Vision Zero and safety of pedestrians and bicyclists. Those issues all existed before COVID, and this plan gives some ideas and direction of how to move on some of those important topics. I do again think that the details of specific legislation, specific zoning text amendments will come as a follow-up to this document, and there will be opportunities to assess where we are with COVID at that time. There will be opportunities to talk at length with the community, the board, and the council as specific initiatives move forward or specific master plans move forward. So I don't feel like this high-level policy document is going to need to be rewritten in a couple of years, because I believe some of the basic and fundamental goals are true whether COVID changes certain aspects of how we live. I do believe, again, after the Spanish flu epidemic in the early part of the century, cities did not cease to exist. People still needed each other. People still wanted to be together in gathering places. People still wanted to have neighbors and live with each other. So I just think that we will have to make changes. We will have to be nimble and flexible as we go forward in implementing a lot of actions because change like COVID is happening, but I think we're on a good path.
Yeah. Well, I think I think you're right, and I hope you're right that the the human spirit of connectivity will win out. I think you're seeing that already on people not in healthy ways, still gathering without masks, and we're seeing numbers go up across the country. So I think human nature I think you're right about human nature. And I think you're right about the plan. I think there's a way to do this in a way that's an aspirational policy document that recognizes we're going to need to change it over time. I'm glad to see you have that work group. I'm very interested in that. I think it also provides an opportunity to fundamentally restructure our economy and how we approach equity and fairness. And so I think it is the right time to do this. I just want to make sure we have the flexibility built in to augment and change over time. So thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think when you read the general plan and then you think about what could be different, how would we write it differently, several years from now? First of all, it's unknowable. And many of the, this is a broad policy document that calls for a lot of follow-up initiatives. All of those follow-up initiatives would be heavily influenced by the context in which they are moving forward, which would be, the state of the world at that time. So, I understand it's a compelling argument for delay. Hey, the world is changing around us. Let's wait until we fully understand how those changes work out until we begin to plan. The reality is the world is always changing around us. It has always been. It's accelerating now. We don't know for how long. And, we're always obligated to do the best we can with the circumstances that we're in. And, I think that if there was one issue that might really cause a profound different plan, it would be autonomous vehicles. And we haven't really tackled that because at this point, it's not even really all that knowable. I think that is an issue that if we had said, here is our general plan, and it's resting on an understanding that we have over how transportation will be provided, in 15 years. Then I think that would be a different thing. But in any event, I have heard a lot of calls for delay. I think as you read the document, it just, to me, it doesn't, I don't see what specifics in there are would be so different in a year or in 2 years, in 5 years. And certainly I take umbrage to, the kind of like have it both waysisms of we shouldn't really do planning, we shouldn't really make these decisions, but let's all talk about why it's so urgent that we have more economic development and more jobs, in the East County. This is how we do it. This is how we move forward on it. So,
Mr.
I wasn't directing that at you, Councilmember Jawan.
Oh, no, I know. I just wanted, if I could make one brief point. The autonomous vehicle, I wasn't going to get deep into this, but I've read a lot about this, as I know you have. I think that is coming, and I think it comes to the trucking industry sooner in highways, but it is a major consideration. I mean, and COVID overlays with it in an interesting way. Then that, you don't want to have.
I'm not downplaying it. I'm not downplaying that issue. No. I'm saying it's a huge one. And I think we're going to rewrite everything once we know what that is. I also don't think we're going to know that for, a long time, 5, 10.
But it does allow us to stop planning for cars, possibly. We'll need less, pavement, perhaps. We'll need fewer parking spaces at every apartment building. I mean, it will help us stop planning for cars.
It could, yeah. Make much more efficient use of the space you have and then give over some of that space. And there would be a big question as to whether we would allow that to, well, anyway, there's just so many contingent factors here. I'm very interested in the issue, and I would love to have a thought exercise about it at some point, over the next year or two. But my own feeling is that there's no certainty there for such a we don't know when we're going to know more about that. And so when we do, we'll review things and change things accordingly. And we probably will need to rewrite the general plan in, 10, 15 years based on autonomous, based on technological change.
Well, Leslie,
I could see that.
Leslie Howerton on our planning staff is very thoughtful architect and planner, and loaned me a copy of a book she has on the history of city planning. And the author documents how the building blocks of what makes successful communities are common across centuries. Yeah. The Mayans, the Aztecs, the Romans, they were building their settlements around the same principles that we're talking about today, including this idea of, they didn't use the terms, walkable urbanism, but they adopted these same kind of concepts of the compactness of form, the mix of uses, these similar kinds of principles. And you could argue that one of the major mistakes of the 20th century was the thought that cars change everything. We should change the way we design our cities and our places because we should fold automobiles into everything that we do and upend centuries of very successful practice in how we design our communities. So yes, autonomous vehicles will change things. I don't suggest that there will be no differences, but I think that we could also make a big mistake if we try to plan around a specific technological development when the things that have proven successful over time have endured. They're classic. They really are timeless because, as Gwen said, it really is about human beings connecting, coming together to trade for economic reasons, for social purposes, to meet, and to exchange ideas. Those are the things that bring us together as people, and those don't change regardless of what the technology is.
You're right. Good. Okay, so Councilmember Friedson wants to speak. We have, 15, 20 minutes remaining for this conversation, and then we need to get to our next item. So, Councilmember Friedson.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just a little confused. I just think we have to remember what this is and what this isn't and what this is supposed to be. And, my view is, this is not about being an operating document. This is supposed to be a strategic plan. This is supposed to be a broad vision, and even the change to autonomous cars, which will be quite disruptive, shouldn't change what the broad vision of the county is. And I'm just a little concerned if the idea is we're going to have a general plan that is so specific in its recommendations that it would have to be written in 10 to 15 years based on a disruptive industry. I just don't think that that is the purpose of this exercise. And I do think that, as we take this up, we do need to be careful that we don't delve too far into the specific details, because this is supposed to sustain for 30 to 50 years. And if the details are too specific and the vision and direction is not, clear and consistent, then I think it misses the boat and delves too far into like a functional master plan as opposed to a general plan. And so, there may be things that are adapted based on autonomous vehicles being around, but the idea of creating corridors and regional connectivity and environmental sustainability and equity and economic development, those core concepts should be there. Lots of things have changed over the last 50 years, but the wedges and corridor idea still remains. Now we missed a few corridors, and we're paying the consequences of that, as we heard earlier. I will say also, and I agree with Chair Anderson on this point, mass transit is not new. What mass transit looks like is new, but rivers used to be mass transit. There's a reason why societies are all on waterways. It's not by accident. That's where the food source was, and that's how you traveled. You got, and that is true in every society and every civilization everywhere on Earth. And so we have used technology to change the way that we do basic human needs, but the broad-based needs are the same, and I think will remain the same. So the question is, do we have a document that creates a vision? Do we have a document that has the values and the direction that we want to go in? And can it be amended to stand the test of time? If it can't, then I think that we have produced a document that isn't what the general plan is supposed to be, and is too heavy on details and too light on vision and direction. I think that's the challenge with the current draft of figuring out how we specify that and how we get that to the right place. And I think the autonomous vehicle test is a very good one. And I think we should use that as the one of the standards to say, okay, if autonomous vehicles comes, do we have to rewrite this? To me, if the answer is yes, then we need to change the plan, because the plan has missed what it is supposed to do. And I think that's a good test for the staff to take at planning, for the planning board to take, and then ultimately for the council to take, because we have to make sure that this is a general plan that is strategic and visionary and not too policy specific, so that it can sustain the test of time and withstand disruptive technologies that we know will be coming increasingly over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
All right. Let's not get too fixated on me throwing a random aside out there about. All right. Well, I have a number of issues that I wanted to raise.
And it wasn't just about your comment. It's the broader question of whether or not some of the policy recommendations are too specific. I think that is an important aspect of this that we need to really be thinking about. To me, that's the biggest takeaway, and that directly reflects the timing of this and whether or not current conditions are going to change recommendations. If they are going to be affected in that way, I think they are too specific, and I think that is a big part of this as we move forward.
All right. So Casey, it seems to me that the component about why we're doing this plan, is a little underwhelming. I think we need a little bit more punch here, and sense of urgency about it. It kind of falls flat to me. So I guess I wanted to ask for your comments. I'm trying to figure out which page. I think it's like.
I mean, I think that that's right. I think that the nature of the process to this point has been, an effort to try to get input from a lot of sources, both inside the planning department and the community and various advocacy groups and other stakeholders. I think it's in the nature of the thing that at this stage of the process, it feels a little bit, for lack of a better term, written by committee. And I think that one of the things we're going to focus on in developing a planning board draft is not like removing or adding ideas, because I think there's plenty of good ideas in there. There might be a few here or there that need to come or go, but basically there's a lot of good stuff in there. It's just not quite to the point where it's sharply framed and expresses a clear vision and direction, which I think is what Councilmember Friedson is sort of alluding to, that really the argument and the perspective it takes on which direction we want to head in the future is more important than the specific recommendations. And certainly specific recommendations need to be flexible enough and adaptable enough to stand the test of time. So I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you, and I don't really fault the staff for that, but I think we're still in the baking process of this document. And ordinarily you wouldn't get it until the very end, but we were committed to bring this to you sort of in mid-course because we wanted to make sure that we were collaborating with you and you wouldn't feel like it was just dropped in your lap next April and you would have no opportunity for understanding what was in it, what wasn't in it, and providing your own direction to us.
So you will be making, the board will be amending this draft plan. I mean, you have a staff draft, and the staff draft is compiled from the expertise of all the planners and the community input. You have more community input coming up. I would certainly encourage you to do more to expand your community input. I think I certainly don't want anyone to come out of this saying there wasn't enough, we didn't have enough time. I think people will say that no matter what we do, but
having lived through the zoning rewrite, I can tell you, no matter when you do it, people will say they didn't have enough time or they didn't have a chance to focus, and that's just the nature of a big project like this. But yes, to answer your question, I think, this is just the beginning in many ways of this process with the staff draft. There's plenty of time for input from the public as well as the board and others. But I think also part of this next stage is not just about gathering more public input, because we've had a substantial amount of that to date, but it's also about sharpening the focus and the clarity of the vision that's expressed to make it a compelling argument about where we want to go in the future.
I will say I found some of the specific requests or ideas about specific plans that might follow up to be a little bit of a cognitive dissonance for me, just because I was thinking to myself, great, this is everything we think we might want to study right now, but in 5 years, we're going to have another whole list of things we might want to study too. So how does that mesh?
Yeah, we've discussed that as well. I mean, Gwen mentioned the idea of taking some of the very specific things out of the document and making them an appendix or a companion document, because it's useful to think about how this could be translated into concrete actions in the here and now. But as far as what's in the document, as far as recommendations, I think if I understand you correctly, I think I agree that it would be useful to describe the recommendations at a somewhat higher level of generality.
I think so, because I think the idea is that as a broad sweeping vision with very concrete elements, it should spin off, implementation ideas or further study ideas for a long time,
Yes, it needs to be. It needs to be specific and concrete enough to be meaningful, but not so specific and concrete that it's not adaptable to what happens over the next 10, 15, 20 years. That's, I think, the balance.
And I think there's sort of like almost an assumption, but I don't think that's really what intended, that, you know, we've considered all of the implications of this general plan, and we have recommended a set of studies to further explore it.
Right. It's not a work program.
It's not a work program exactly. It's intended to point in the direction of of a work program. But you know, I think to be honest with ourselves, like in 5 or 10 years, what we might recommend doing as a work program might look different than it. So many of those I think are essential. Some of them struck me as likely to drop out. But by having them all in there, I think it risks making the plan seem more in the moment than.
Yeah, we don't. When you read the 64 plan, a lot of it really holds up pretty well more than 50 years later. And we would like to say the same thing about this document in 30 plus years, that you'd look back on it and not say, oh, that feels dated, or that seems like a concept that was sort of, you know, fashionable in 2020, but it's not really relevant today. So we're very mindful of trying to find that spot.
So you'll be making changes at the planning board, and then the council will make changes at the council. So there are multiple iterations ahead of us, and I want to compliment the staff. I think you're doing a marvelous job, Tanya, Khalid, Caroline, Gwen. I really enjoyed this. I will say, you know, I think there's some maybe different views out there. I think it can be improved. I'm not saying it can't, but I think it is a compendium of all the things that we know we have to be doing and looking at. And I think there's a lot there. So you can, you know, I do think you got to get it across the finish line, no question. But I think it's a very, you know, it's too long. I don't even know exactly if I want to throw out specific ideas I have. I'm not ready yet. I got to do a little more work on my end to develop some of these concepts. But I do think, you know, we need to all be thinking about, well, what would we like to see in there?
Yeah, and I would just say to any of the PHED committee members, if you have specific comments about any aspect of the document, either that you really like or that you don't like, things you think, you know, you'd like us to focus on more, or things that you think are don't make sense, please contact us separately. You know, send us a list of your issues and concerns, and we definitely, as Chair Anderson said, we had committed that this was going to be a collaborative process with you, that we weren't just going to dump a final product on you and say this is it. We want it to be a collaborative process. That's why we've been coming to you every step along the way, and we have another, you know, I think another 9+ months to collaborate on this.
Well,
thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate that comment, Gwen. I remember that part of the conversation too. And then we got hit with the curveball that is COVID. But I think this is the right time to re-engage on that. I did want to just flag one issue, because you all talked about it quite a bit in your, I think rightly so, as the underlying premise and an example of, you know, the reason we need to focus on racial equity in the plan. You know, East County comes up a lot, and I'm a proud resident of that part of, as designated by several groups. I live in Colesville, which is one of the communities in East County, is self-designated. I think oftentimes, and in this conversation, we talk about East County and talk about the history of what happened there, and as far as the lack of investment and the lack of growth. And I wonder if this general plan, I wanted to get your thoughts and maybe make a suggestion that we might also reimagine the mindset of what that means, you know, but when we say East County. I think, unfortunately for some, I kind of, people fall into two categories. They either didn't know that we divided the county up by names of Up County and East County, you don't tend to hear West County used, right? You hear Bethesda or, and I think there is something that we need to think about in this plan potentially, and I think a lot of your policies are trying to get there, wanting to build corridors and complete communities and all the things that we want and that live in Silver Spring. I think it's important to know too, as far east as you go, it's still Silver Spring if you type it into a map. And so I think you could easily say Silver Spring for all of it. But I just think there's something that I want to probe and see if you had any thoughts now about changing that, the way we talk about it. Because I say Colesville, I say Silver Spring. I don't say, because I think there's unfortunately been some connotation in that's a negative thing, or that we need to help those people or this kind of thing. And I think it's just something I wanted to raise. We want more development in restaurants, and we want things to not have to travel to Rockville or to Bethesda or other places to have amenities. But at the same time, I think there's a lot of great things going on as well. And I worry about that language, and I just wanted to raise it in the context of this plan.
Well, as somebody who, I consider myself a proud, almost to the point of having a chip on my shoulder, resident of the East County. Now, it's funny, since I moved here 20 years ago, people have started to have an attitude about where I live, very close to downtown, is like, well, that's not really the East County, because that part of Silver Spring has enjoyed a lot. It's much more popular place for a lot of people, have decided, hey, this is, the redevelopment that's occurred there is great. Housing prices have appreciated, but I still consider myself part of the East County, and I'm very proud of it. But I think that you raised an important point, which is there's a lot of good things going on in East County. There are a lot of great places in East County outside of that area of those neighborhoods immediately around downtown Silver Spring. I know in the past, some people have proposed things like, well, we should really not be calling other parts of the East County that are sort of further out Silver Spring, because they would tarnish Silver Spring. I heard people talking like that just within the last 5 or 10 years. I actually think maybe we should think about the opposite way.
That's what,
that maybe we should think about places like Colesville or Burtonsville or White Oak, ways to promote them as their own places, not because we're trying to disassociate them from Silver Spring, but because we can and should take pride in those communities and highlight some of the amazing things that they have. My favorite park in the entire park system is Fairland, which is way off there on the edge of the county, on the Prince George's County line, the far northern eastern edge of the county. I bet you not 1 in 100 people in Montgomery County could tell you where Fairland Recreational Park is. And that's really a shame, because people are missing out. They're missing out on Cuba de Air in Burtonsville. They're missing out on that, what's the Indian place called that in the Hillendale Shopping Center?
Bombay.
Or is it Jewel of India? Or, that with the great buffet. I mean, there's so many amazing things that we have. I hope that the flash service is going to start, focusing people's attention on what East County has to offer. But in answer to your question more specifically, yes, I think in the general plan, we can highlight this idea of, and Gwen has really incorporated a lot of that already in the plan, the importance of a sense of place. And she usually talks about it in terms of design excellence or in terms of things like historic preservation. But it's also true in the way that you're saying, which is even what you call a neighborhood and the way that you talk about that neighborhood and the way you, and not to be too crassly commercial about it, but the way you market it is important. And I think that we can include more of that in the plan.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Andrew.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out La Chapala is right there, which is maybe one of the best Tex-Mex Latin American food, and Cuba de Ayer, which is probably the best Cuban or among the best Cubans. So that is probably a strip of food and culture in Montgomery County that might be the best stretch of food and culture anywhere. And I think it speaks to exactly what you were what you were talking about, the placemaking opportunities and all that. But I do think to the previous points that have been made, and to Councilmember Joanna's points, this was, I mentioned before, we might have missed some corridors. I mean, this is, this speaks to that. And some of it happened organically, but what could have happened if we were more intentional and thoughtful about it? People pushed this, in spite of a lack of planning to make it happen. If it had the support of the planning, what was organic and what intentional and planned could have merged together to build upon that, more and better amenities and opportunities and neighborhoods and jobs, et cetera. So, I mean, that is the goal here. I mean, that is what we should be thinking of to make sure that we don't just fix the problems of the past, which clearly we're trying to do with the corridor focus, but that we think about, how we can get ahead of things to have the solutions for the future, to make sure that we have the broad-based vision. And, I previously talked about, and there was a quick mention in here, but, I think regionalism is a key part and has to be a key part of this. The idea that, wedges and corridors was an extension of DC only. And in 1964, that made sense because it was DC as the center of the universe in this, broader region, and to a certain extent, Baltimore, which was like a world away, and farmland, and some close in suburban, kind of semi, suburban neighborhoods. That was it. But now, we are part of a much broader region. I mean, all of the things that we have done, Northern Virginia, Howard, Frederick. I mean, there's just so many. University of Maryland, the Purple Line connection. I mean, part of our lack of planning has led to a lack of regionalism and a lack of connectivity, transportation and otherwise. The focus here is transportation, which is a key part of it. That's the glue that binds it together. But it's more than just transportation. It's changing the sphere of influence of the development patterns and the focus to how do we connect across the river? How do we connect north? How do we connect east? And, thinking really strategically and thoughtfully about that, and not just focusing on DC. Obviously, DC will always be a key connection point, but even DC is not just the center of the federal government anymore. I mean, there are as many federal installations in Maryland as there are in DC. And so thinking about how we connect to those federal installations and create that web is critical. I hope that really gets fleshed out from a strategic standpoint as well. We really focus on that as well, because I do think that regionalism is going to be a key aspect of the next 50 years, how we connect through transportation, how we connect with communities, how we connect with economic development as a broader region.
All right. So council members can, consider what they might like to suggest and talk to planning staff and planning board. The planning board will be taking this up in the coming months. I do encourage you to think about additional community input, and then the council will receive it, and we'll have our own opportunity to make changes if needed. So lots of work ahead of us. Great work. Thank you. Excited about this. I'm sure we'll be able to improve it in the coming months, but to me, I think we're touching on a lot of the key issues that we need to be touching on. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now let's keep moving because we have another really interesting big topic. So Jean and Pam are here. MCEDC, I'm sure they're here. Can turn on their cameras. We are great. All right. So we are now following up on a discussion that we've been having at the committee and in public for some time. In the budget in not this year, but the year before, we added some funding for the planning board to really do a deeper dive on research-driven economic development and specifically the potential to expand the presence of higher education in the county. MCEDC has been working on that as well, and the county executive has been working on that additionally. So with the study that was done, we kind of brought everybody together and produced a set of, very helpful reviews of other communities, what they've done, specific enterprises around higher education and satellite campuses, different, theories, hypotheses about how we might want to proceed. I think what we've ended up with as a result, today's packet for this item is just an incredibly useful resource, to help anyone who's interested in this, thinking about all the different elements and how to synthesize everything and put it together. There's a number of action items that I would like to, really make sure we talk through today before we break. I think that we're probably just going to turn it right over to planning and MCEDC to go through the presentation. But Pam and Jean, do you have any, other prefatory comment or advice about how we would proceed here this morning?
No, we can go straight to planning. I'll just note for IT staff that Mr. Bancraft, I believe, will need to share a screen if that's not enabled as he gets ready, because they have both planning and MCDC, or Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, have a presentation. I'll just preface that the action items are less action items and more thought exercises in terms of the process, just to be clear. But certainly, I'll go ahead and give it back to you, Chair Reamer, since this is mostly planning and MCDC's show.
All right. So Stephen Kraft needs to, is it Stephen? No, it's not. Ben Kraft needs to be able to share screen. All right, there he is, Ben. Okay, so let's hear from planning and MCEDC.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share now. So hopefully you all can see that. Yeah, well, thank you. Councilmember Reamer and Jean, and as it's been stated, that I'm Ben Kraft. I'm with Research and Strategic Projects in the Planning Department, and I have with me Sarah Miller and Nadia Khan from MCEDC. So clearly the background was given. This is about research university presence in Montgomery County. So I'll just get into the introduction and talking about what this project is about and how it came about. So I think for most of the people here at this meeting, it's the kind of recent stagnant growth the last few decades is well known, as is the conspicuous lack of a research university in Montgomery County, which is quite a rare characteristic of a county the size and stature of Montgomery County. What Montgomery County has had through the years is a really strong and large set of federal research institutions, most notably NIH, and that's really helped set the growth trajectory in the past for Montgomery County and made it, the county that it is today with a really strong life sciences sector. The problem with that is that the returns eventually start diminishing in the sense that, they still do great work there, but where a lot of economic growth depends on the commercialization of innovations and entrepreneurship, federal labs are a little bit slower, and a lot of that has to do with tech transfer restrictions for federal researchers, which is being worked on, but ultimately that is up to the federal legislature. What universities can do is be a little bit more nimble with their tech transfer and get that innovation out into the marketplace a bit better and create more growth. So that's part of the backdrop for this.
Sorry, Ben, just a quick comment here. This is an issue, the tech transfer restrictions is an issue that I highlighted in the 5-point economic development plan that I worked on and put forward a year or so ago. And I, working with my colleagues, ensured that the BHI contract and that MCEDC would have a programmatic strategy to think about those issues. A lot of this was based on really good thinking by the Maryland Life Sciences Advisory Board, and Brian Darmody gave us a really incredibly useful white paper about all of these topics. So we now have BHI and MCEDC working, at least beginning the process of identifying a strategy for us to tackle some of the restrictions on tech transfer at a policy level. And for me, an important part of follow-up is going to be working with our federal delegation and our partners to really build an alliance and make that happen. I think we've got more at stake on that than anybody, any other jurisdiction in the country, frankly. And we need to really make this a big priority. All right, please continue.
Okay, well, thanks for the context. Yeah, I mean, regardless of whether there's, a research university eventually in Montgomery County, that's obviously a huge priority.
Right.
So it's good that that's being worked on. That goes to say that this has been an issue, lingering issue for quite a while. It kind of, I guess, came to a bit of a critical mass last year. We both MCEDC and planning were kind of at similar times asked to look into this issue. We thought we would, since that was the case, we thought we would collaborate, and that's what led us to these kind of three complementary studies and documents that we're talking about today. And I will also note that part of, I think, the inspiration for this is the people taking note of Cornell Tech in New York, which is essentially a brand new campus that Cornell University, based way upstate in Ithaca, has established in right on really essentially an island in between Queens and Manhattan to do some really interesting, to have a new graduate educational format. And I think people caught wind of that and saw that it was possible. And so that gave some momentum.
Shout out to Councilmember Berliner, who I think put a bug in the ear of myself and the county executive, but also the Amazon process. When we pitched Amazon, higher ed was a major component of that economic development strategy. Virginia is already executing on their higher ed economic development strategy. So, I think we all really we understand now we've got a path forward around research and innovation. But the purpose of this study is to try to figure out, at least an origin of it was to figure out, could we land another university? I will also say, for me, what I learned at the outset of this, as I thought more about it, was we've already got the equivalent of multiple universities with our labs. We need to be focusing on leveraging them at the same time as we think about how to expand, what a university presence is. All right, please continue.
Sure. Well, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of factors that came together to make this, the time to do this study, at least start it. And the last thing I want to note is that this is about graduate and really doctoral and even postdoctoral level education and training and research. Montgomery County obviously has a really robust 2-year educational system with Montgomery College. We have a 4-year degree granting institution, universities at Shady Grove. This is more aimed at the research that goes on in labs. A lot of it's spurred by PhDs and done by PhD students. So it's a kind of a different level of than what exists really in Montgomery County outside of the federal labs at the moment. So just to summarize the three pieces of research that are in the packet, there's a study about the case studies and lessons learned of places that have actually established branch or satellite campuses in the past. that was done by Bull and Smart on behalf of planning. Then there is what we're referring to as the Margraves report, which is really essentially how to think about Montgomery County in the context of the Empower initiative, which is linking University of Maryland, Baltimore and University of Maryland College Park, and some of their research efforts. And lastly, there is a really interesting staff report by MCEDC thinking about this. This is looking, in contrast to the Margraves report, looking out of state and what kinds of options might there be out of state. How do we whittle it down to potential targets? And then even they went as far as to interview some people involved at those universities to kind of see what they've been looking for. And so I will start here by just giving a brief overview of this case study report by Bull and Smart and Alvarez and Marsal. So again, as I said, the goal was to assess the characteristics of research universities that have open satellite locations and types of public and private investments required of them. Again, the focus is on graduate and postgraduate, doctoral level, mainly education and research. And this is a really in-depth set of case studies. So unfortunately, the brief outline here won't do it justice, but I'll go through some of the main points. So first, this is not a common thing in the first place. There aren't a lot of, there isn't a huge history of satellite or branch campus establishment around the country. It's even more rare that it would be specifically focused around life sciences, which doesn't necessarily have to be if we would do something like this in Montgomery County, but I think the logical place to start is with our life sciences industry. So there, it'd be both kind of novel in the sense, but also there wouldn't be that many preceding examples. And so just as a counterpoint, I guess, Cornell Tech is much more, it's really not about life science. It's more of kind of the Silicon Valley model of consumer tech and business to business tech, software development, gadgets, things like that. It's not so much centered around our biotech industries, which is probably where we at least partly be looking. Second, and this is fairly obvious, but it's good to have all the evidence in the report that universities require a compelling business reason to expand. It's risky, it's expensive, they have a lot of capital invested in their flagship home campuses. It's not going to happen for no reason. Satellite, and thirdly, and relatedly, satellite campuses require a distinct identity to take advantage of local presence. This can be unique curriculum offerings and research capabilities. So once again, to kind of, belabor the Cornell Tech example, not only, I mean, the compelling business reason was to be in the innovative and entrepreneurial milieu of New York City. That just doesn't exist in Ithaca. And Ithaca is a perfectly fine place, but if you really want to move up a level in kind of innovation and commercialization, you need to be where the venture capital and the knowledge is for that. But what they also were able to do is experiment with a new type of instruction and curriculum development. The way that they've structured their departments at the Cornell Tech campus is around transdisciplinary hubs. So the type of teaching and research is just different than what they typically do at the main Ithaca campus. So it doesn't need to be like that in any future, but the point is that they're able to do something unique and different.
They also have the ability to offer degrees that might be a little unconventional. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if Maryland could do a lot more in that alone, I think, just in general, is my understanding from what I've heard from, higher education leaders. But, okay, keep going.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely room to explore that. So also, fourth, phased growth and private sector support are key. These are large undertakings. They tend to occur in phases. It allows for evolution, see what's happening, to change the plans for expansion or do different things. And it's just frankly expensive. And almost all of the examples, I believe, at least all the recent ones, had significant private sector support, not to mention land. Often land was large, key pieces of land were donated to the project. And then, so this last point about these fundamental systemic shifts that the Bull and Smart report is calling it is, I think, a really important one, especially in the context of the previous discussion about the general plan, which I'm also part of that, so I was listening there, and this idea of both what that sound a bit contradictory. The focus on urban environments and technological disruption, meaning the idea that things can be done remotely over Zoom, and we're in this, giant experiment about how that's going to work currently, especially with university instruction. But I don't think they necessarily need to contradict each other, and I think that this goes, it has a lot to do with a discussion that was happening around COVID and the general plan, and where the increasing and consistent tendency for people to matter in certain parts of economic development and innovation. There's just certain things that no matter how many opportunities there have been to distance, we've continually seen more aggregation and co-location of people in especially large cities, and that's where we've seen innovation happening, despite any previous predictions that everyone was going to be working by themselves in their own dispersed environment. And so I think thinking about that, especially in the context of high-level research, especially in the life sciences, where you need equipment, you need labs. It's there's a lot of physical infrastructure that's necessary there, even if some of the actual pedagogy can be done online. And again, we'll see how online teaching ends up working out, and whether it'll be total or just partial in the future. But I think that the case for physical collaboration and in especially in urban environments remains very strong, regardless of kind of where we end up on the other side of COVID-19. So that kind of opens up the opportunity for that. And with that point, I will give it over to my colleagues at MCEDC. I believe Sarah is going to talk about the Margrave Strategies report.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. It's good to see everyone this morning.
Yes,
I just want to, before we talk about Margrave, I just want to go back and talk just a little bit more about Cornell Tech, even though we've talked about it a lot. Because the interesting part about the Cornell Tech project, from our perspective at MCEDC, is what really happened that led up to the RFP and the choosing, right, and the selection of Cornell Tech. And so, as we said, we've been at this for a while. There was obviously a large gap because of COVID, but so a little bit over a year ago, we had conversations with Seth Pinsky, who was the CEO of the New York City Economic Development Corporation at the time of the Cornell Tech development. We also talked with Bob Steele, who was Mayor Bloomberg's deputy mayor. And we wanted to really think about kind of how the sausage was made and what things we should be looking at as we go through this. And I think one of the things that stuck out to us particularly was looking at what their private stakeholders, and in some cases they're anchor institutions in New York, but largely the private sector stakeholders, what they thought New York would need in the future. And so while Ben has done a nice job telling us what the compelling reasons were for Cornell to move to New York, there's equally an important side from the locality and what we're looking for.
Right.
So in the case of New York, the applied sciences was something that they were really interested in. And then certainly they had separate conversations in terms of the real estate component with landowners and things of that nature. But it was, again, talking about the future and the economy and what types of talent they thought they would need, what types of businesses they thought they would need, what types of product launches they thought they would need. And so I think that can't be underscored enough in this.
It was the mayor and his team brought together their private sector partners and said, what do we need to grow our tech economy in the coming years? And they identified a workforce pipeline, constrained pipeline. And they said having more degrees in applied sciences, which is a kind of more flexible type of degree that is more closely aligned with employers and current needs in the market, is sort of my understanding of it.
Yep.
And so they went big, and it's a beautiful campus. I've visited. It's pretty impressive. But as you said, I think you're trying to make sure we understand it was driven by a collaboration with the private sector. It wasn't a magical solution handed down from the government.
Correct. There are no magical solutions. I think one other piece of it, though, also is the social venture component of it, which I think plays really well in Montgomery County. But so having that as kind of our framework, we went first, obviously, to Margrave Strategies, looking at the impact or the opportunities for collaboration with the University System of Maryland. And then a little bit later, we'll talk about our non-Maryland research as well, and Nadia will take us through that. The Margrave strategy is really straightforward and simple and kind of reiterates a lot of things that we already knew, right? Which is that College Park and also the University of Maryland and Baltimore have outstanding resources. They even recognized internally that they needed to do a better job facilitating partnerships and collaboration with federal entities and also the private sector. That's where the Empower program came about. Dr. Locascio, who runs that program, had been part of this Margrave. You can skip through that, Ben, if you want. I'm not really into okay, that's good, thanks. So Dr. Locascio had, as part of this study, had been kind of throwing out some ideas and taking a look at what she had been seeing and thinking about how the University System of Maryland was moving forward. And really what happened was that this intersection, right, of life sciences and biohealth and big data to solve complex challenges was really the piece that she thought we should pursue. And this was, interestingly, pre-COVID. And so I think that whole concept, right, of addressing complex challenges at the intersection of life sciences and big data certainly seems to make a lot of sense. I think that, your colleague, Mr. Friedson, was at our board meeting this morning, and so he's kind of at an advantage having listened to James Chung and Reach Advisors. And so that group, they will be presenting their findings later in November, but really that was taking a look, a really in-depth data-driven analysis of kind of where Montgomery County is and what we need to do moving forward. And what we really like is when different types of studies and things that we're working on really come to the same conclusion. And so, Mr. Friedson, I hope you will nod your head vigorously when we talk about some of this, saying that it is not just our idea, there is data to back it up.
Well, not to be outdone, I've already heard the James Chung presentation twice.
You have, that's right, you were in there, so that's great. So
this morning was my third, but I don't want to get into a conversation.
Okay, well, so one of the things obviously that is really exciting to us is thinking about data, drug discovery, vaccines, and things like that obviously have a huge, that big data can have a huge impact on. So we're kind of squared away with that. And again, James's piece this morning was about tying all of these disparate pieces together. And so I'm not going to spend really any more time on the Margrave report other than to say, regardless of the real estate component, we should 100% be working with the University of Maryland in a more strategic way, let's say, and most certainly with Dr. Locascio and the Empower program. So moving on, I think, to our third component, which at the time when we were talking to people about this and kind of running it by people, sometimes seemed a little far afield, but thanks to Mr. Chung and his research as well, I think that this becomes more realistic to us. And so Nadia is going to talk you through most of this, but again, our method of looking at this was at non-Maryland researchers, and in particular, the actual people doing the research and the actual tech transfer offices at some of these universities, and she'll tell you about how we chose them, but it was really people working closely with industry and people who are in locations where perhaps not being part of a large biohealth or life sciences cluster is a detriment to them, and there's something that we in Montgomery County can offer to them and vice versa. I would also just like to we spent the majority of time talking about biohealth. We also want to make sure that everyone understands things like hospitality tech and IT are also equally important. We just think that at this point, the biohealth cluster is more fully formed, more mature, and also is, evolving much more rapidly than others. So that's why we spend a lot of our time talking about biohealth. So Nadia, would you like to hop on here?
Thank you, Sarah. So as Sarah mentioned, we did do a little bit of outreach in the hospitality tech space and looked a little bit at some other verticals, but we really wanted to focus for our report on the life sciences, because when we look at opportunities for our technology innovation ecosystem, biotech is really kind of leaps and bounds ahead in terms of all of our tech verticals. And it really is impressive at a national level when you look at kind of the strength of our industry cluster that's here. We have about 19,000 highly educated biohealth workers. And when you add in NIH workers, that number jumps up to 40,000.
Yeah, if you added in all the lab space of NIH, we would be the biggest cluster probably in the whole country. But the NIH-owned space doesn't really count in those private market assessments, right?
Correct, yeah. And we have this really strong clustering of private industry here as well. We have over 300 companies that fall within this category of biohealth, and they include some very large anchor companies that are doing very innovative tech-based work, some mid-sized companies here, and then we have a very healthy number of startups that are really exploring very innovative technologies. When you look at our entire biohealth region, biohealth just in the county, we have captured about $1.4 billion in venture capital since 2015. And that number is really important to us because venture capital is really challenging for companies to obtain, generally speaking. And there's a high amount of private sector vetting that goes on behind the scenes with those deals. And really looking nationally, we don't see a ton of activity spread out throughout the country. So to have that level of activity right here in the county clustered just within biohealth is very significant. And we think that that could be of interest to certain partners outside of our community. And when you branch out a little bit and just look at tech more broadly, we've captured about $2 billion in venture capital in the same time period. If you looked at the DMV region collectively as a state and treated it as a state, we would come in number 4, right behind California, Massachusetts, and New York, which in our mind really solidifies this region as a tech hotbed. And, as we've been researching and working with universities through this process, we're seeing that there is a trend towards universities wanting to evolve to be more entrepreneurial as a way to really grow their research portfolios. And so, as they're looking to take on these huge unmet challenges in medicine and in biohealth, they're more open to looking to partner with private industry to solve these challenges rather than go about that alone. Particularly as the technology itself is starting to evolve and become a lot more interdisciplinary as it intersects with traditional engineering or advances in data science and some other fields as well. So when we think about Montgomery County, we think there are tremendous assets here that could really capture the interest of some specific universities, particularly when you think about our cheaper price point than New York or Boston or San Francisco. Of course, we talk a lot about our highly educated workforce in high-skilled professions that can really come together in unique ways to support industry academic collaborations. And of course, we have a really high quality of life here, particularly when we think about international graduate student populations. I think it's really unrivaled. I've personally put together attraction pitches for international prospects that are really built around the strength of cultural resource assets for particular groups that really some of our competitors, even Research Triangle, really can't compete with in that regard. So putting all that together, we really do think there's something here that's attractive. And what we wanted to do is understand what that subset of institutions are outside of Montgomery County that might look to us as providing something for them that's not as easily accessible in their home communities. Next slide, please. So we created this tool, which we're calling the University Matrix. And we started by looking at the research universities that produced the highest number of life sciences PhDs. And this for us was a proxy to try to understand who might want to be in Montgomery County or have a larger presence in Montgomery County in order to be closer to potential employers for their life sciences PhDs, or to collaborate on research partnerships around their research projects. We also looked at who was the top recipients of NIH funding from 2017 and 2018. And this served as a proxy for us to understand which research universities have complementary research interests to our industry here locally. Once we put those two lists together and created this base list of universities, we looked at a number of other factors that we thought would be really helpful in this conversation. So we looked at out-of-state investing. If the research university had 30% or more of their companies that they invested in, and those companies had headquarters outside of the location of the research university, we shaded that green here, and that was, indicating an interest in investing outside of just their home community. We also looked at the diversity of those investments. So if the institution was investing across 10 or more industry groups, that was also significant to us as an indicator of universities that are really looking to expand their research portfolios. Lastly, we looked at the number of venture capital deals and the total value of those deals in the home community as compared to Montgomery County and the broader DC region. And if that activity was lower than our region, we also shaded that here as well. And the last factor that we looked at was whether the institution was advertising out of state locations or campuses. Again, for us, that was a way to understand which universities culturally are amenable or open to the idea of having research occurring elsewhere besides the flagship. And so if you go to the next slide, please, Ben. So ultimately that gave us these two tiers here of universities that we think could be really interesting partners for Montgomery County and might be really interested in what's happening here based on these criteria that I've talked about. In particular, Purdue and University of Illinois, those were two institutions that also came kind of to the top of the list with some of the research from Reach Advisors, which you've heard a little bit about and you will probably hear more about in the coming weeks. But those two institutions in particular stood out for having really complementary interests in immunology and quantum computing, and also having really strong tech transfer arms. And so it's been really helpful for us to kind of see some of these parallels coming up between some of our research and some other scopes of research that we have going on as well. So as we move forward, we thought it was really important to engage directly with some researchers at these types of institutions, because really, in the context of campuses, they are often the ones who are driving the IP and driving the research projects themselves that can, produce all of these great economic benefits that we are interested in. And so we initiated some initial conversations with them to try to better understand what it is that they are looking for to enhance their research and whether they would view Montgomery County as an asset in their work. We chatted a lot about what particular tech areas are of interest in terms of having really great commercialization potential or growth potential. We had a lot of really great conversations with them, and I'm happy to kind of talk about that a little bit more in the Q&A. But I wanted to focus here on these highlights that came out of those conversations. The first one, industry partnerships were recognized across the board as very valuable to researchers for a lot of different reasons, but they look very different across institutions. So we engaged with some universities that had very large scale collaborative partnerships with very large companies, multi-year and kind of centered around big research questions. And so we saw examples of that, and we know that those kinds of partnerships do exist out there. But we also engaged with universities that told us they actually preferred to work with smaller and mid-sized companies because they'd seen more success in terms of negotiating licensing deals and other types of arrangements with those types of companies. And they actually noted a trend of those companies approaching them earlier in the process and really also trying to broaden the scope of partnership and try to negotiate broader collaboration deals as well, which is really interesting to us. We also engaged with some professors that had informal relationships with private industry, particularly in the field of computational sciences and computational biology. We spoke with professors that were being approached by big tech, Google and other companies in that sphere that were very interested in basically kind of snapping up those graduates and pulling in some of that talent in the big tech space as well. And so I mentioned that to say that, these partnerships look very different across the board. We did have several universities that were very interested in learning more about Montgomery County and learning more about the opportunities here. Generally, these were universities that had very well-developed tech transfer capabilities. We also had some interest from an international prospect that, for their own reasons, was very interested in looking at quantum computing and big data, and also had an interest in biotechnology and was kind of interested in putting those two together and wanted to know a lot more about what could be done in Montgomery County. We also connected with other researchers and universities that were less interested in university partnership. Sometimes these were Ivy League schools or smaller universities that had research capabilities but were much more undergraduate focused. And so I think what's important here is to understand that the idea of industry partnerships really looks very different across different institutions, and the interests are complex and vary as we kind of look within this space more broadly. But in our minds, as we think about the future in Montgomery County and whether there is an opportunity to think about a physical location or a physical component to what this partnership could look like, it seems to be more likely where there are a lot of existing relationships already and multiple relationships that could kind of make that transition more meaningful to the researchers and the universities themselves. So that's the last point here on the slide. We think that thinking more about the industry alliance or perhaps creating an institution of some kind could be a logical pathway to really bringing more of these partnership and collaboration potentials into focus with some specificity that we could then build off of and hopefully see all of these positive effects with talent development and potentially new company formation that all of us here are very interested in seeing. So I will pause right there and turn it back over to you, Councilmember Reamer, if there are any questions or comments on any of this.
Great work. Again, I think this has been a big theme for economic development. We're seeing across the river, Virginia is moving forward with huge investments in higher ed, to partner with their tech sector there. Surprisingly, Maryland has not really followed suit, even though it was a central aspect of our Amazon solicitation. I think we could be doing a lot more. So, some of this can be driven from the county. I think we also need some state partnership here, and we have a terrific team, I think, that could potentially help us figure that out. I'd like to hear from Ben Wu as to what kind of next steps he thinks we ought to be considering. I thought the letter you sent us that Casey and Ben signed together, Chair Anderson, was quite useful. Outlines a number of really pragmatic steps forward. But I'm very interested in the idea of creating an alliance, and just having a program here. I think that generally what this, I think is, the headline here is there is a lot, there's a lot of opportunity when you think about the long term, the incredible assets we have, being very strategic and trying to leverage those and build on them and invest in our strengths could yield really significant benefits. But we've got to have a team that's focused on it, that is, continually working on it, and tackling all the, intricate and complex issues that are involved here. Let's hear from Ben Wu.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, let me say thank you also to the incredible team, for Sarah Miller and also Nadia Khan, for the work that they've done. I think that they have worked very hard over the course of this year and a half in looking at this issue, engaging with the details to try to bring to the lawmakers and the policymakers the criteria that's needed in order for us to consider how we can holistically come up with this alliance that you've been talking about. Let me also extend a thank you also to the Planning Board, to Ben, and also to Carrie, and really the entire team over at the Planning Board. They've been terrific partners. When the council asked the Planning Board to look into this issue, concurrently, we were also engaged by the county executive to explore issues that were very relevant as well. And so we were able to partner and align ourselves in order to create these 3 complementary reports. And this partnership that we have with planning extends not just to this issue, but also to others. And we're really excited that we have this new partnership that allows us to enhance our data research capabilities and analytical capacities, so that we can continue to inform and educate the lawmakers, the policymakers, and the business community at large as we move forward on trying to create these economic recovery strategies that will get us to the other side of this crisis. As we look at this issue of trying to develop a research university presence here in Montgomery County, it's a critical issue because we always benchmark ourselves to Silicon Valley, to Route 28 in Boston, to Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, Austin, other places around the country, and even looking around internationally at the world. And if there's going to be one ingredient, a secret sauce to all of these high-tech, innovation-led economies, is the ability to have a substantial academic research university presence. And in Montgomery County, with all of our assets, with our workforce, with our federal assets, and with everything that we have going on with our county, that is one ingredient that we lack. And so being able to take a look at how we can develop that ingredient is not just a good exercise for us as we look at the future of our county, but if we can do this, we think that we can catapult ourselves into being not just a national and regional leader, but also a global leader. And so this conversation is very important. But as you've seen in the reports, this conversation is also very difficult. Because trying to attract a research university into Montgomery County, there has to be very compelling reasons why they need to come here. Also, you look at how COVID-19 and this pandemic has impacted academic institutions, and we see that between the loss of tuition, declining enrollment, the move to remote working, the budgetary impact, it's not as an easy consideration.
Brick and mortar. It's a tough time to be talking about brick and mortar.
Well, not just brick and mortar, but just even notionally investing outside of their campuses that they already have existing, because they're trying to get past this crisis. They're trying to do the care, nurturing, and feeding of of trying to maintain the status quo, at least for now. And so this pandemic exacerbates the decision making, and this not only do we need compelling circumstances for us to be able to attract a research university. At this time, we need very, very compelling circumstances. So, having all of these criteria to be at least discussed, we want to not just have the academic conversation. We want to see, is there something that we can continue to do to get us to that point? And this could be incremental. It could be years, decades in the making. But if we can begin this conversation today and have some actions taken, then the benefits will be profound for Montgomery County, for the region, and for the country, I think, too, because we can leverage all the assets that we have, federal, our workforce, our demographics, and with that additional ingredient, that secret sauce, then we can really be a real leader and help our nation's international competitiveness as well. You've heard two potential items for discussion that we could focus on. One is on life sciences, the other is on quantum as well. Quantum computing is going to revolutionize how we live and do business. And if we can be on the cutting edge of that, and we already have a significant investments in quantum through NIST, through the NSF funding and Department of Energy funding that's over in Germantown, also NSF funding over at University of Maryland. College Park is one of the leaders in the quantum space from the academic institution field. They actually have more investments, I believe, than any other institution on quantum. And so we already have a built-in academic advantage there. And then if you couple in the NSA and what quantum will do to revolutionize cybersecurity and protect our nation's security, and U.S. Cyber Command is located over at Fort Meade. You have within our state, within several mile radius of Montgomery County, a number of significant assets that if we can connect together, we can be a real leader. And of course, the life sciences, as you know, we are already a leader in developing a COVID-19 vaccine. And then what we expect we'll see in the next generation of life sciences will be the convergence between information technology and also life sciences, and quantum will also help revolutionize that industry as well. So we have a number of areas that we can begin that conversation today and to see how we can get there. It won't be easy and it won't be quick, but we can at least have the foundation that will get us to that point. And so that conversation, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your hearing today. It can start today.
Terrific. Thank you. I look forward to working with you and with everyone as we go forward to take all of this, significant big thinking and wrestle it to the ground with some specific programmatic, initiatives, budgets and staff. But we got to synthesize a lot of information here and pick our priorities. So I think today's presentation, really can help move the ball forward on that. And I'd certainly like over the next month or so to try to, refine it and really figure out what are the short term and then the medium term steps to be taken forward. But an enormously useful project. Again, Carrie Sanders, thank you. Terrific work. You really did an amazing job with this. Okay, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate all the work. Obviously, this has gotten a lot of attention recently. There's been a lot of discussions. Certainly, this committee talked about it quite a bit, maybe a year and a half ago as well. And, certainly having a significant research presence to dovetail with the key assets that we have in Montgomery County would be really significant to economic development, to business attraction, to talent attraction, to continue to push the envelope. I am a little curious of what the next steps are. I mean, I think it's a really helpful project to see what the clear opportunities are and where we could potentially go. I'm not entirely clear. We need a partner and we need funding. I think those are the two key aspects. I'm not sure that we have either at this point. So I'm just curious as to, what are the next steps and what are we thinking? Who's going to be leading it? Is MCEDC leading it? Is the executive branch leading it? Are we going to have, is this committee going to be involved in it? Where do we go from here?
Well, I was sort of asking the same question, but not as openly. I mean, I think we have to figure out those next steps. So let's get some feedback on that. Ben, what's your comment? We'll ask Tina as well. Tina Benjamin's here as well.
I do think that the EDC wants to play a role to help support the effort. The county executive has a very clear interest as well, and so I know that the county executive wants to have some input, and also the county executive has a big vision of what this could be. So I do think that it's going to have to be a collaborative, and that we don't necessarily need to have one entity own the whole issue because it's going to be a multimodal, a multi-prong effort. As the chairman said, this is going to require not just county support. In order to do this effectively, we need to also get the governor and have the state support, and not just from the governor's administration, but also from the potentially the university system support as well. And then additionally, the federal side, if we can work a way to get the buy-in from the federal and get some federal investments in and be able to leverage some of the federal funding, that tripartite process is probably the secret to how we can succeed. So there's going to have to be many components and many layers to this. I do think that first we need to, while we put a lot on the table for consideration, we need to look internally to make sure that we get the support or at least have the understanding of the capacity of the University of Maryland and the university system into this effort as well. Not only because there are hometown system, but also because that's where we can have the most impact. And also we have existing resources that exist in Montgomery County from the university system as well. The universities at Shady Grove is going through an evolution. As you know, they have a new president or executive director for the universities at Shady Grove, and Ann Academia starts this week. I think today actually is her first day. And so what we need to do is also explore whether or not there's going to be an evolution at USG, a USG 2.0 that would allow for them to not just be a location and a site for the other campuses within the USM system, but also to see if they might be able to evolve into an academic and research component as well. So there are a number of outstanding issues that still need to be resolved, but having these conversations concurrent with each other, I think is useful, and then we can continue to reassess where we are and see how we can move forward.
Tina?
Yeah, thanks, Hans. I really appreciate it. And I really agree with Ben that this has to be a collaboration between all of us to really move this forward. I also want to mention this isn't a short-term effort, okay? This will take years, and that's okay, because remember back, well, I kind of remember, it was a little bit before my time, back in the 1980s when, Bill Hanna on the council was talking about life sciences, and people were like, what are you talking about? And it has literally taken since the late 1980s to get the industry to where it is today, which is amazing. But I think really what needs to take place next is thinking about where the life sciences industry evolves into, which is truly the intersection between up and coming technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning and quantum computing, which when we stop and think about it, it's just really exciting. So a couple things for everyone to be aware of in terms of activities and then kind of next steps, okay? One is that the county executive has met with the top leadership at the University of Maryland, NIH, and with a lot of CEOs within the county's life sciences arena, and has gotten great response in terms of, here are our assets, and here generically is what we want to do in terms of taking the industry and really for Montgomery County to be on the cutting edge of the next phase of the evolution of the industry and creating that whole kind of ecosystem, right? So we've had some really good meetings. Both BHI and JLL are working on kind of presenting the why Montgomery County, both from an industry, life sciences perspective, but also from the real estate, community environment perspective. BHI is also taking the research that has been done and shared with you today and taking it one step further to look at international organizations and potentially private sector organizations, right? And then I think the big missing piece is how do we bring all this together? Okay, I think that's what we have to really work on next. How do we better identify the it and how do we pursue it? But I'm really excited about working with everybody on this. I think it really does have the potential to, again, change Montgomery County like how it changed in the late 80s through the 90s in terms of the growth of the industry.
If I could just add one piece, and Tina and Rich Bendis and I had a conversation last week, kind of coordinating this conversation internally with the people like doing the work day to day. But I also just, as we talk about this grander vision for Research University President, I just don't want us to lose sight of the importance of these individual relationships with out-of-state researchers and tech transfer offices in terms of connecting them to our private sector cluster here. So that needs to be a component of this overall vision, regardless of what happens with the real estate.
Right. Yeah, it's good to see the county executive sort of following along with this idea of focusing on NIH and our existing labs and leveraging them. As I was saying earlier, we have thousands of postdocs and PhD level researchers. They would be the envy of. They are the envy of the world. And if we can all focus on building on our strengths, I think we'll really get somewhere. So, I think there is a lot of common interest here in charting, in a very broad way, the path forward. But, we also have to all get on the same page about an implementation strategy. And, I think that's what we really need to focus on over the next couple months is what exactly are we going to do to move this forward. I certainly have a number of related ideas, and I think we all do. But
we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, well, you've been hearing them. That's why. That's why we're here today. All right. Will.
I wanted to thank MCDC and everybody, Ms. Khan, Mr. Wu, Ms. Miller, Ms. Kraft, everyone for putting this together. It was a very helpful. It was not my fourth time seeing it, so I appreciated it.
That was Reach Advisors. This was only my second time seeing this presentation.
Got it. This is a concept that I think there's vigorous agreement that we need to move forward and leverage our great assets here. I agree that we need an implementation plan. I like the point that I often make that, we are our own, entity and community. We have a lot of strengths that are unique to Montgomery County, all of our assets that have been mentioned. And I think, I can't remember who said this, but, that we're fourth or fifth in ranking in life sciences and these other areas, I think you go down the list, we're fourth or fifth in a lot of areas, or third or second. And I think that's a unique thing about us. And it doesn't have to be just one. This is certainly a very exciting, and we should pursue it fully. But I think the idea of a research institution also is that it could help us leverage our strengths in other industries and other areas, and grow over time and be something that conforms to who we are in Montgomery County. And so I'm really excited about it, and appreciate all the work that's been done, and look forward to putting forward additional ideas and getting it rolling. So thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with everything that's been said here. I mean, I think everybody is interested, everybody's excited, everybody believes that this would be a terrific path forward, how to complement the tremendous gains that we have at USG, how to build upon the significant work that the county public and private sector have done together to create the biohealth strength that we have in Montgomery County that rivals just about anywhere else in the country. I think the question is, what do we do from here? I'm still unclear, and I think we need to flesh out what does progress look like. I mean, I think we all recognize that we're not going to get there in 6 months or 9 months or a year, that this is a long-term strategic vision. But a vision without a direction is a fantasy. And, we need to make sure that we're plotting and we're thinking strategically. And as we talk about this being a collaborative effort, it can't be, every different element working on this in different ways with different ideas. It has to be everybody coming together, brought together with one strategic vision. I think that the county executive, really has to lead that effort, but it has to be clear what it is and what progress looks like. And I think there's still a lack of clarity of what it really is and what progress looks like. I think we're all interested in what it might be and what progress could be, but world-class assets, top talent, and unlimited potential are not going to create jobs, are not going to create economic activity, are not going to generate the revenue that we need to push the county forward. We need something more. We need something real. And so, I think, we're all looking to help. We all want to be, part of this effort. I think we all have different things that we would bring to the table, both individually and collectively, different organizations, different, private and public assets. And it's a question of how we come together to move towards something real and something that actually can show progress in a meaningful way that can be articulated publicly to stakeholders and to community members who I think have generated some interest and a significant appetite for where the county is headed as well.
Okay.
Well, if I could respond back a little bit to Councilman Friesen's question about where do we go next. There are a couple of things that I think that are going to take place, at least that might help crystallize how we move forward. And these components are not exclusive to each other, but would all feed into the greater purpose. First is the county executive's desire to have a White Flint development and the potential that could have for attraction for a research university. The second is the evolution of USG and determine whether or not USG can be more than it already is. They do a terrific job, but they are not a degree granting institution and they don't perform research. Is it possible for USG, because it's based here in Montgomery County, to evolve into something much greater than it already is? And that conversation needs to take place between the USM chancellor and the leadership within the system, as well as with the USM Board of Regents as well. And I do know that the USG Board of Advisors are also very engaged on that leadership question as well. And then, there are other components too that we do want to explore that right now may not be fully fleshed out, but could have some impact. For example, on the quantum issue, making sure that we can develop a talent pipeline for potential workforce development. And this means that we start with MCPS and move on to the academic institutions to see whether or not we can get a foothold into that workforce or develop that so that we can then be not just a thought leader on the issue, but then we could also have a pipeline that could create an industry around it. Another component that we're working on that the chairman mentioned is trying to make sure that we have a greater presence for postdocs and graduate students. A number of our federal agencies are engaged with being supported by postdocs, and they come from not just around the country, but also around the world. And so they've already been introduced to Montgomery County. And so we'd like to be able to have them stay here and be able to keep their brain power so that we got brain gains. We tried to support postdocs, for example, through the most recent Bioinnovation Conference that also had a postdoc conference to be able to take the postdocs at NIH, also at NIST, and to see if we can place them in jobs locally so that they can be employed and remain here in Montgomery County. So being able to not just support postdocs, but also continue the cultivation of these postdocs and graduate students. Even if we don't have the research university presence just yet, we are moving forward to doing that. And then there are also just some preliminary discussions that we are having with the University of Maryland College Park, and the fact that Daryl Pines is a new president and the former Dean of Engineering. I've had a chance to work very closely with Daryl in my previous capacity, and he's very visionary, and he understands the importance of what College Park, our flagship campus, locally, regionally, and also even internationally. And so one thing that would like to explore is whether or not we can engage the Big Ten Research Alliance into having a physical presence somewhere, or at least a virtual presence located perhaps in the county. That's going to require the county to be a leader in making the investments, in creating the incentives for these type of potential projects. But if we can get a consensus and coalesce around the goal and the mission, it's possible. But right now, trying to get to that next level and trying to engage research universities is going to require a substantial commitment from the county, and then to find partners on the state and then also the federal side as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I think we have to really do a better job writing down and articulating what we want, what we think, for example, the future of USG should be. Because left to its own, the university system has its own prerogatives and its own, internal challenge, ways of aligning resources. And, it will just simply produce a result that is a logic of its own organizational priorities. So we have to develop what we think should be, and then be able to articulate that publicly, and have that conversation with this governor, have that conversation with the next governor. This is a bigger, longer project, but that's how USG was created in the first place, right? It was the county's private sector leadership coming together with the county government and saying, we need more of a workforce, higher ed strategy here in the county. Let's create something.
And those conversations, Mr. Chairman, are already ongoing right now between the USG Board of Advisors as well as within the USM system and within the Board of Regents. I think that we're very fortunate to have the governor appointed former county executive Ike Leggett, who knows USG very well, onto the Board of Regents. So
exactly.
We're looking for additional champions, but those conversations are ongoing, and so we hope that they will be fruitful at some point.
Right. I think we
will see that evolution of USG. And if I could also just add one point that Sarah Miller had referenced earlier as well, is that one other component that we're looking at and we're engaged in is trying to take our federal assets, especially on the tech transfer side and commercialization, and bring those opportunities not just locally but also to other parts of, nationally and other parts of the country, especially with universities, to see if we can get that foothold in to Montgomery County.
Yep, that's where we need to be focusing. Okay, good. So we have lots to follow up. We'll schedule another PHED in the next, month or so, and we'll, have the next iteration of how we're going to move forward, more specific ideas. I think a lot of good content has been brought together. We had wanted to have this conversation, months ago, but COVID has just caused everything to kind of be, pushed aside. But this is an essential long-term strategy for the county, and now it's time to get focused here. So I think it's a little bit more than a year ago that this committee, we convened a tech transfer work session with MCEDC. It was the first time there had been any significant conversation about our federal labs in years. Literally 5 years probably since it was really a focus. And since then, I think there's just been an incredible acceleration of interest and excitement about all of this. As an aside, we also had a terrific conversation about opportunity zones, and now we have a proposal on the table around impact taxes and opportunity zones in the county. So the work of the committee from a year ago is paying substantial dividends. Now I think we need to kind of really just bring it home here. And we've gotten, since that conversation a year ago about tech transfer, we managed to restore the contract with BHI, which had been suspended. And we have a work program now, once again. It took many months to get the executive branch on board with that, but I'm glad the executive branch got on board with restoring our contract with BHI. I think county executive was giving a speech there this morning, as a matter of fact. And we have some terrific work product in the works with BHI and MCEDC around tech transfer, around intellectual property and the federal labs and all of the challenging roles there. So we'll be synthesizing this and we'll be working forward from the committee, and eager to hear more expertise from everybody about how we're going to work on this together. Any other comments here before we break? All right, very good. Thank you, everybody. Much appreciated. We'll talk to you soon.
Homes and helping with employment. And by the way, we help about 3,000 people a year